Shabbat Shalom. Earlier this week, the Jewish community marked the 4th anniversary of the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, and the media was occupied with something a little different, which is the ongoing saga of Kanye West, rapper, clothing impresario, and the author of increasingly deranged accusations and even threats towards the Jewish community. And what that anniversary and what that story, of course, have in common is hatred, anti-Semitism, and I have to say that I really prefer not to speak about anti-Semitism from the Bima, not because it doesn't exist, because it does, but because I feel like there is so much positive about being Jewish that should be the focus of our lives. And also I feel like giving more oxygen, giving more attention to hateful people doesn't always help. And yet today, I do want to take the opportunity to offer some insight from our tradition, because this is a phenomenon in our world and a phenomenon that is growing, that it is important for us every now and then to pause and consider and contemplate. So as we think about the Torah portion this week, it's sort of odd that hatred of Jews is called anti-Semitism. So first of all, I would note that in general, if you hate people of another group, there's a generic word for that. They can call it racism and so on, or discrimination. And yet we have our very own word, but it's called anti-Semitism. It was originated in the 1870s, that word, and it actually comes from our portion this week. So when Noah has 3 children, Shem, Ham, and Yafet, and so according to tradition, Yafet is the ancestor of the European peoples, Ham is the ancestor of the African peoples, and Shem is the ancestor of everyone in Asia. And since the land of Israel is technically in Asia, that makes us descendants of Shem, Semites. And in fact, if you followed all of the begats this morning, you get from Shem through Aver, through Palu, through Reu, eventually down to Terach and Abraham. And so that makes us Semites. So anti-Semitism is the word for hatred of Jews, but by the way, like more than a third of the world is Semites, right? So arguably, people from China are Semites. Ethnic Indians are Semites, right? Mongolians are Semites, right? Arabs are Semites. Anti-Semitism, we're sort of limiting to a very narrow scope there. And so even though we are part of a very large circle of Semites, somehow that term sticks to us specifically. And part of the irony, so on one of his tirades, one of the things that Kanye said was that we are not the real Jews, so you can't be an anti-Semite because African Americans are the real Jews, which is a whole complicated other thing. But I want to focus on sort of a broader question, which is, so why does someone who has so much going for him feel the need to say these things? Well, he says them out loud because he has untreated bipolar disorder by his own admission and is off his meds. Why does he believe them? Because a lot of people do, they're just not willing to say it out loud. A lot of people, what they might think, what they might whisper, what they might say behind closed doors, or they hide behind technicalities, legalities, euphemisms, or dog whistles. He's willing to say those things out loud because he is disconnected from the rules that a lot of us live by. And our Torah portion this morning, the way our rabbis interpret it, gives us an insight into that. So the Torah portion says, "Vatimale aretz Hamas." So the world is full of Hamas, of hatred, of theft, of some wickedness. And the rabbis ask what this was, and they give the following explanation. That in the days of the flood, the penalty for every crime was death. If you stole an apple, the penalty was death. And yet, the people were very subtle. And so the issue was that the penalty was death, but there was a minimum. If you stole less than a pruta, less than a few cents worth, then you couldn't be prosecuted for that. So everyone figured out if there was a bowl of grapes, everyone would steal one grape. Well, I can't prosecute you for stealing one grape. It's less than the minimum. I can't prosecute you for stealing one grape. It's less than the minimum. But sooner or later, the whole fruit cart is gone. And so they were sophisticated enough to engage in kinds of theft that were not subject to prosecution because they didn't take enough that you could really call them on it. And so that was really what brought on the flood. It was a continuing drip, drip, drip. Not enough to address any one drip, any one drop, but wait long enough, and suddenly there's a flood. And so in some ways, that is actually the world in which we live today. A world of subtlety, of dog whistles, of just this side of the line. So there's an election in Pennsylvania where one of the candidates has attacked the other because his child goes to an exclusive day school, otherwise known as Jewish day school. The Texas Railroad Commissioner race, one that 538 is not following closely, one of the candidates has advertised himself as the only Christian on the ballot. Now, that's technically true because his name is Christian, but the other guy, named Luke, is Jewish. And you see it in other subtle ways as well. So, for example, on college campuses, Berkeley University and the law school, there are 9 different student clubs and organizations that declare that they will not welcome any speaker who supports Israel or Zionism. Drip, drip, drip. Or at the State University of New York in New Paltz, there was a survivor group for survivors of sexual assault, and 2 members of the group were kicked out because, well, you are Zionists and you have no place in our group. And so the world is full of people who are smart enough to steal one grape, who are smart enough to steal less than a pruta, who are smart enough to let go just one drip and be able to say, this is not our flood. But that drip, drip, drip becomes a puddle. And so if you follow the news closely, there are from time to time attacks against Orthodox Jews in New York. Or here in the Atlanta area, you'll hear a discussion in a school board that runs just the wrong way. You know, we didn't realize that our logo was the Nazi symbol, and why are we still talking about this? And so the challenge is that a drip, drip, drip grows. And so Kanye, until recently, had 31 million followers on Twitter, which is a lot of people. And we live in a world where increasingly unhinged conspiracy theories actually get more and more traction than they ever did before. And that's what happened at Tree of Life, by the way. So this was an individual who, had his own problems, his own issues, but being in an environment where all that he saw were conspiracy theories about Jews, that's where he chose to exert his evil. That is where he chose to go awry. And so what you see is a small number of people walking and talking and acting out loud on what a larger number of people believe. Now, by the way, what's ironic is that anti-Semitism has actually changed tremendously in America in the last 50 years. So in the 1960s, when you did a poll, more than a third of Americans would say that they are anti-Semitic, that we hate Jews, right? Because they killed Jesus, whatever it is, whatever their reason. Today, that number is down to 11%. The difference is that anti-Semitism, if you will, went on vacation for a few decades, or it went underground, went into hiding. The challenge is that there is a much larger percentage of that 89% that is willing to not say anything when the 11% speaks up, and therefore the 11% is emboldened to act on its beliefs in ways that it might not have before. So after Kanye started going further off the rails, Adidas was one of his main sponsors, and they kind of took their time cutting ties. Now, people have noted that the founders of Adidas were actually members of the Nazi Party in Germany, and they were the preferred shoe provider for the German army during World War II. But those folks have passed away. They are no longer the owners of Adidas, right? So you no longer support the Nazi Party if you buy Adidas shoes. And I don't know, maybe now they've left Kanye mail, then maybe they'll now make a deal with Pete Davidson, I don't know. But the challenge is that the further it goes, drip, 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 the more it becomes normalized and the drip becomes a puddle. And we definitely live in a world where acting out with violence is more and more common. So you may have heard yesterday an individual went looking for a senior politician with a hammer trying to kill her and attacked her husband, instead an 82-year-old man. And so we live in a world where that is no longer condemnable, where, I wouldn't do it, but, people are upset. And so that same approach is what allows that drip, drip, drip that we experience to become a puddle, to become a bog, to become a flood. So what do we do? Well, one suggestion is build an ark. Right? So there are those who say this is the time, right? Direct flights from Atlanta have not come a moment too soon. Move to Israel. Although, by the way, I would tell you that hatred for Jews, right, also happens in Israel and also happens to Israel. And so I think we actually face an interesting and historically unique challenge, which is that on the one hand, there is a small segment of American society that hates Jews more openly and more fervently than ever before. And yet at the same time, Jews are more beloved in America than they ever been in any other society, including, by the way, possibly Israel. If you look at the statistics, if you ask Americans, what religion, what ethnicity would you most like your child to marry? The answer is, if it's not your own, the most common answer is Jewish. So in fact, right, the country is divided between those who want to kill us, a small minority, and those who want to kiss us, a larger minority, a larger majority. And so that is where we live, and that is where we wrestle. So I would argue that we actually have a unique role and responsibility. It is not yet time to build an ark, although it's always nice to know where you keep the wood just in case. But in fact, that we have an opportunity, we have maybe even a responsibility to be present as part of a conversation. And whichever side we may be on in any particular issue and any particular debate about things that go on in our world, to remind the people on our side that there are values that transcend whatever issue is being debated and discussed. That there are values of decency, that there are values of standing up and saying, look, even though you happen to be on my side, it is not worth it to me to have someone who says what you say be on my team. And so I think as we watch the drip, 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 we have the opportunity to bring out a pail before we get on the ark, but that time is sooner rather than later. Shabbat Shalom.